เราก็ได้ดูตัวพรีวิว C300 ไปแล้วนะครับทีนี้เดี๋ยวเราจะมาดูคนที่ใช้งาน C300 จริงๆนะครับก็คือMr.Vincent Laforet นะครับซึ่งมาในงานเปิดตัวในครั้งนี้ด้วยแล้วก็ให้ความรู้อะไรต่างๆมากมายนะครับซึ่ง Mr.Vincent Laforet พี่เอาเกินนิดๆนะครับจริงๆจะเป็นช่างภาพนิ่งนะแล้วก็เพิ่งกระโดดมาทำภาพเคลื่อนไหวนะครับทำภาพยนตร์เนี่ยได้ไม่นานนะครับแต่ว่าเป็นคนที่มีความสามารถมากๆนะครับแล้วก็เป็นคนที่มีมุมมองอะไรใหม่ๆนะมานำเสนออยู่เสมอเอาละอย่างพูดแค่นี้นะครับเดี๋ยวเราไปดูบทสัมภาษณ์กันดีกว่านะครับว่าจะออกมาเป็นไงบ้าง
Let's start it. The
Sure.
first question.
Yeah.
So as you're one of the famous filmmaker in the world, as everybody knows, so I would like to ask you, what would bring you to this level as one of the best filmmakers?
Well, I'm not sure I'm quite one of the best yet. I have a long way to go. But you know, I think it's like anything that you do. Practice makes perfect, and a lot of serious studying of other filmmakers, both the good ones and the bad ones.
Yes.
Find out why the bad ones are bad. You learn a lot from that, and also study some of the best filmmakers are out there, and use the pause button and rewind to watch the same scenes over and over again to figure out why they were shot the way they were.
Speaking of SLR, yes. For you, like, how does it started with you?
Well, for me, it was by mistake. I went into Canon in New York and saw the prototype of the 5D Mark II. And I begged them to borrow it over the weekend.
Really?
And they said no. And I asked them again, and they said no. I asked them again, and they said no. And on the fourth time, they finally said yes. So they let me borrow the 5D Mark II over the weekend. And on that Monday, they said ship it to the photographer it was meant to go to. And I shot Reverie 2 nights. And that changed my career. After, at that point, 18 years of photography, I went headfirst into filmmaking.
Wow. So since you become a filmmaking, right?
Yeah.
Back in 3 years ago.
Yeah.
After your short film called Reveille was published.
Yeah.
Is there any change about the film industry?
I think that people were shocked with the quality coming off of this camera. Given its price, the size of the sensor, and the low light performance. And I think what it really did is it definitely took hold in professional productions, but it also took hold with advanced amateurs and amateurs who wanted to become filmmakers. They no longer had to go to film school or get 35mm or 16mm film to get the look of a filmic look. And I think that's why it did take the world by fire and still does today.
Well, in the past 3 years, what part of your work that you have been used the HDS?
What part of the?
Yes, what part of your work?
For quite a bit.
Quite a bit.
I'll be showing at the theater some of the different types of works I've done, but I've used every camera for the past 3 years, from the 5D, 7D to the Red One, the Epic, and the Phantom. And now it's nice to have Canon have a professional cinema camera like a C300. To be in the game.
So now you started to shoot with the new Canon C300.
Yep.
So what is your first reaction after you using this camera?
Well, when I first saw the camera specs on paper, I wasn't that impressed. But when I saw the image, I was extremely impressed.
Wow.
It's a very compact camera that has a fantastic dynamic range, a beautiful image, and performs very, very well in low light. So I think it's gonna be a hit with a lot of people, especially you can definitely shoot a Hollywood film with it. But I think if you're an indie filmmaker or a documentary photographer or filmmaker, this is one of the strongest cameras out there.
Amazing. So I would like to know about the image quality of this camera. Can you explain a little bit about it?
Sure. I think when you'll see if you look at Mobius, the short film that I shot. We shot a scene at the end in desert light at 11 o'clock in the morning, which is one of the hardest situations for any digital camera because of the amount of contrast between the highlights and the shadows. And this, we did a full 360, and the camera held the entire time, both the highlights and the shadows. So I find that this camera has to have one of the 4 or 5 best sensors in the world, I think.
Wow. So it's really good for low light performance.
That too, yes. Probably one of the best cameras for low light.
Well, is there any problems with the ISO? I would like to know like how much ISO did you use?
We stayed at 850 the whole time.
850.
Because we were told we would get the most dynamic range at 850. However, some of the filmmakers, like in the Sword, went up to 20,000 ASA.
So, it's still good quality. Like
it is. It's usable. I personally wouldn't go up above 6400 ASA. I think that's where the image stays very clean. 32, it's very, very clean. 32, you start to see a little bit of noise. Anything above it, you see a lot more. But what's exciting as a filmmaker is that 2 years ago, you would never think you would shoot at 6400 ASA.
I have read some of your blogs. As you mentioned about the grain of C300
yes.
is different from the normal video camera.
Yes.
And you also refer to the code. Yes, the dry X.
Yes.
This is really surprised.
Well, did you see the images? I mean, if you've ever worked in a dark room, you know what a negative looks like under the projector. The alpha channels, the chroma channels, the luminance channels look very filmic in the grain structure.
Yes.
And it's quite impressive. I've never seen that in a film camera. Maybe with the Alexa a little bit, but not with other cameras. And I find that really exciting because if you underexpose or if you push the image a little bit, instead of breaking up in this weird digital ugly noise, it breaks up like a negative would, and it's relatively pleasing.
Yeah. So, can you please explain a little bit about the dynamic range?
Sure. This dynamic range is around 12 and a half stops, which is very impressive. We shot everything in C-Log, which gives you a flat image, but the most amount of detail possible. And you know, the Alexa, for example, has another stop and a half over this camera, but it's about 10 times the price with a basic system. So it's pretty impressive that this camera is that close.
Really nice. So, well, in about the process, I mean, after footage, and you, I mean, I would like to know how easy for the post-production.
Right.
I mean, compared to 5D Mark II and C300. So
I think they're both very similar now. When you use Adobe Premiere, you just drop the files in and edit. There's no transcoding. So in the past, before Premiere supported HDSLRs natively, both Final Cut and Premiere, and other software, you'd have to transcode, which was a pain and slow you down. Whereas now you literally take the files off the CF card, dump them into Premiere, and you start editing, no transcoding. So it's really simple, very straightforward.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So I mean, well, last question. So, I mean, in the future, after the C300 selling out of the market, I mean, everybody's can afford to buy it. I mean, so what direction do you think of the HDSLR it's gonna be?
I think HDSLRs are here to stay for a long time, mostly because of the size of that sensor and the price point. I think the average person has a hard time buying cameras over $10,000. Let alone $10,000. So, that's the beauty of the 7D or the 60D, is that, or even the 5D Mark II, is that they're still relatively quite affordable for people. And that's a very important point.
Yeah, and it's really small, right?
It's small and compact, which is not always good.
Right.
Because it's not very stable.
The size.
And it's not really built like a normal camera. It doesn't have all the features you need. But if you're starting off, or I mean even high-end productions, but then you have to buy more equipment to make it better. But if you're starting off, it's a great way to just focus on getting a beautiful image and learning how to become a filmmaker.
Wow, interesting.
เป็นไงบ้างครับสำหรับซีรีส์นี้ของเรานะครับได้รู้จักทั้งตัวผลิตภัณฑ์ของ Canon ที่เป็น Cinema Line ตัวใหม่นะครับแล้วก็ได้รู้จักกับช่างภาพระดับโลกนะครับ Mr. Vincent Laforet นะครับซึ่งหลายคนน่าจะได้ประโยชน์จากตรงนี้เยอะได้ทั้งเทคนิคการทำงานได้ทั้งเบื้องหลังนะครับได้รับทราบว่าเป็นยังไงแล้วก็ได้แรงบันดาลใจดีๆอีกหลายๆอย่างนะครับที่จะไปใช้กับงานของตัวเองนะครับพี่อาต้องขอบคุณ Canon นะครับประเทศไทยมากๆเลยที่ให้โอกาสนะครับเราได้ไปสัมภาษณ์อย่างใกล้ชิดนะครับได้มาดูตัว C300 อย่างใกล้ชิดเลยแล้วก็ได้ลองใช้งานได้ลองเล่นอะไรหลายๆอย่างใครสนใจนะครับก็ลองดูนะครับว่าจะเหมาะกับงานของตัวเองหรือเปล่านะครับพี่อาก็มีหน้าที่ประมาณนี้แหละนะครับแล้วเดี๋ยวหวังว่าคงจะได้โอกาสเจอกัน บ่อยๆนะครับสำหรับการทำงานในลักษณะนี้โอเคครับสวัสดีครับ